This is a production of Cornell University.
So the title of my sort of overview talk is Soil Health Pioneers and Emerging Frontiers. I've already introduced myself. There's more about my bio in the handout you've got, so I will, without further ado, proceed on. What's been exciting to me as someone who's been working on this at Cornell since about 20 years ago is when Cornell first started working in the area of soil health, and just a great merging of an era in the science, particularly the soil biology and soil ecology of major discoveries. With our old Petri dish techniques, we really hardly knew what was going on in terms of the microbial community in the soil, but with molecular biology, learning much more. Just amazing biodiversity and abundance, and learning that almost all of those things are very beneficial for farming, and learning how to manipulate them. And some of those I talked about in my book that came out about 15 years ago called Tales from the Underground. But what this blended with was at the same time that we were having these amazing discoveries about learning more about life underground, the farmers were becoming worldwide, and in New York in particular, farmers becoming aware that while we've had continued productivity, even increased productivity over the past century, in a lot of cases this is coming at the expense of our soils gradually degrading, particularly losing organic matter. So a lot of farmer motivation to do something to rebuild their organic matter, make their soils more productive, more resilient. And this also blended with also new information we never had before about the biology. And then more we're learning today about soil health, human health, and the environment, all those links. That farmer aspect was really captured in a book by my colleague Harold Van Ness, who can't be here today, Building Soils for Better Crops, kind of really a how-to for farmers. Many of the farmers will be very familiar with this. And Cooperative Extension's been through numerous editions. Harold wrote that with Fred Magdoff from University of Vermont. And finally, we have our most recent book here I've got on the list, the one we're going to hear about this afternoon from David Montgomery at University of Washington, Growing a Revolution. And in that book, does a lot of things, but one thing that I like he's done why we wanted him today for this talk, he really does a great job of capturing the history, the worldwide movement happening in farming, and how we really are on the cusp of a major revolution in farming, and puts it in that perspective. So a lot of fascinating stuff. One of the things that we know today that we had no idea about when I was in grad school, to age myself, but it really wasn't that long ago. When I went to grad school, it was plants, and what their roots do is take up water and nutrients for the plant and anchor the plant in the soil. We know now that what's probably as equally an important thing of what plants do is what their roots exude into the soil. They release a fair amount of the sugars from photosynthesis, which attracts bacteria to them and helps them. Those bacteria can help them mine the soil around them for nutrients. They exude trace amounts of chemicals that inhibit weeds, insects, and disease, attract all kinds of beneficial microbes to them, and also can release substances that literally dissolve nutrients in the soil that they otherwise couldn't acquire. And then the other thing that we really appreciate more is how roots forge their way through the soil, and particularly with compacted soils, some of them are able to do this, help break up compaction in a more natural way instead of tillage. And also this creates pathways, water, oxygen for other roots, perhaps cash crops, to follow. And of course, these roots are sequestering carbon deep in the profile, which otherwise would be in the air as the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide. So without going into a lot of details about all this kind of research, a lot of this is going into our thinking about rotation crops today and fall, winter cover crops, learning not just the amount of biomass they produce, which of course is important, getting organic matter back into the soil, crucial to soil health, but these other things they might do for particular problems. One example is Sudan grass, which would be familiar to many of you who are farmers or working with farmers in the room. The Sudan grass is now known to release a compound called sorgoleone, which can suppress weeds and also pathogenic nematodes. So if you've got that kind of problem, this is a good prescriptive rotation crop. If you've got compacted soils, this is a good one to try. Its roots are very capable of getting into compacted soils. And of course, also it's pumping organic matter deep into the soil. And as I say, that these plants and these substances they're releasing are not only important in their own life cycle, but can be very valuable to a subsequent crop to follow. So that's this plant legacy effect. So all of this work is going into what's happening with cover crop research today. Another big thing about cover crops, and this is where really farmers, I think, take the lead and often lead us as much as we lead them for sure, is a how-to. So even if we accept and understand that, for example, using fall, winter cover crops and keeping the ground covered increases our biomass and have all kinds of benefits. Trying to integrate that into our cash cropping systems in a short growing season is very difficult. And so many farmers are really leading the way. And this is showing a picture of some interseeding of a cover crop into a corn crop. These techniques for really integrating this into our cropping system. So a lot of exciting stuff going on today, and we'll hear more about that today. Okay, so I talked about new stuff, new discoveries about what roots do. And of course, then there's the whole thing about all this soil biota and all these things we're learning about them. So in addition to roots possibly of some species releasing substances that control weeds, pests, and disease, certain microbes can help us in that way, basically biological control underground. That top picture, a cute little picture of a mouth part of a nematode, a little microscopic worm that's abundant in many different species in the soil. A couple of them are parasitic to plants, but hundreds of these species are in almost any handful of soil, and many of them beneficial. This is a bacterial feeder, the mouth part of a bacterial feeder. These microbes, of course, are very important in nitrogen cycling and essential to all life on the planet, actually play an important role in making all kinds of essential nutrients for plants and for humans actually available. So they play important roles in that. A nitrogen fixation, that's something many people are familiar with, legume crops. What I have a picture there below that nematode is showing some tiny rhizobium bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, latching onto the soybean root, a root hair of a soybean plant, a legume plant. Those will invade the root, welcomed by the plants because they will capture nitrogen from the air spaces in the soil in exchange for photosynthesis. And we're learning more about how to maximize these sorts of symbioses. All of these creatures that are in the soil and the large abundance of them release sticky substances. And of course, the fungi that are in the soil release those fine hyphae that help hold the soil together. And this leads to good soil aggregation, which is amazingly just critical to water holding capacity and good drainage in soil. If the soil is completely dead, you'll have very poor soil aggregation, without a doubt. And also the roots themselves, some of the substances they release help hold soils together. So that's another crucial thing for drought and flooding resistance. So this is all new information working into our research. This is a slide from Jenny Cowan-Niffen, a researcher at Cornell, soil biologist who unfortunately had a family emergency and couldn't be here today. But this is where she lives, in the Rhizosphere, a very narrow zone of soil, just within millimeters of the plant roots. If you pull up a plant, there's that soil that sticks to the roots. That's really the Rhizosphere, just that really narrow. It's a hot spot of plant-soil interactions involving microbiota. And again, most of them are microbiota that were called for. Plants send out signals to attract those microbiota to benefit them. And so we're learning a lot about controlling that Rhizosphere and making the most of it. Jenny's research really works a lot on, okay, so the microbial community we've known for a long time, and many farmers, of course, always been concerned about disease organisms that might have negative effects, but how do we maximize those good guys in the soil that might have these positive impacts on our plant and suppress the pathogens and those others? And so a lot of work on compost and various ways to manipulate the soil for that purpose. I mentioned pioneers, and I wanted to mention, at least one or two going quite a ways back. This is Dr. Salman Waxman, who is a professor at Rutgers University, one of the first kind of true university accredited, you might say, soil biologists, working in the 1920s and 30s. He had grown up on a farm, and he was convinced, having grown up on a farm, he saw so many diseased plants and animals turned into the soil, and somehow the soil doesn't just continue becoming more and more toxic. He was convinced there had to be, he coined the term antibiotics in the soil that help purify the soil. And at the time he was working, penicillin had been discovered, but that was the only antibiotic we really had. Make a long story short, after years of research, he discovered streptomycin and got the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1952. Coming much more to the present time, another kind of something that happened started about 15, 20 years ago, is a lot of talk about soil health emerging around the country, around the world, and here at Cornell. But this thing of it's kind of a wishy-washy phrase, what is that? And what Cornell really has been at the forefront of, one of the things that's been at the forefront of, is really developing a new kind of soil test for the 21st century that goes beyond just the chemistry of soils, which is what our parents and grandparents knew about, pH, acidity, the calcium and magnesium and nutrients in the soil, but also integrating into the soil test biological and physical indicators. And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail about Cornell's comprehensive assessment of soil health program, but we have a table in the back right, Aaron, that's got some information about this and the website there for those of you interested. And there's a lot of course, groups working on this. It's a work in progress. We're always updating this and improving it. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about tillage now, because I've talked about one way of rebuilding our soils, building up organic matter, is this idea of maintaining vegetative cover. So we're basically, as much of the year as possible, sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and some of that ends up in the soil as organic matter. It's a very good thing. But what happens with when we plow and till the soil is that over-oxygenates the soil, and it really accelerates microbial activity that's in the business of breaking down organic matter. There's nothing wrong with microbes doing that, but if they do it way too fast, it's so-called, fans the flames of excessive organic matter decomposition, and those nutrients disappear before plants can even acquire them and are leached out of the soil. This often, this problem of too much tillage often begins with a problem of compaction. Obviously, you have compacted soil. A farmer thinks, I've got to go out there and till it and plow it. So you get on this vicious circle of compaction leading to increased tillage. That then leads to declining organic matter because you're oxygenating the soil. Less organic matter, less food for the soil food web, fewer soil microbes there now. That reduces soil aggregation, poorer soil drainage, and the soils are more prone to compaction, a vicious cycle. So the way to get away from this is we still may need some tillage for very severe cases, of course, but also integrating into this the idea of using cover crops that may biologically, with their roots, help break up the compaction, or actually thinking about things such as earthworms and the work they can do in helping break up these things. Speaking of pioneers, it seems like as a biologist, no matter what I'd get into, Charles Darwin was there before me. So he was a soil biologist too. His last book, for those of you who don't know, some of you may know about this, was a 200-page book on earthworms and the important role they play. Before this, many people just thought of them as parasitic creatures. But a quote from him: "The plow is one of the most ancient and most valuable of man's inventions, but long before he existed, the land was in fact regularly plowed and still continues to be plowed by earthworms." Last, I just want to mention one other kind of technique for rebuilding our soils is directly adding organic matter to the soil in terms of composts or manures. And biochar is something that's actually more of a pure carbon substance that can be fortified in various ways or attract microbes to it and be a benefit to the soil. And so we'll hear a little bit more about that, I'm sure, today as well. So it's another avenue, reducing tillage, cover crops, directly adding soil amendments such as that. I have just a few slides left. I wanted to talk about what's really exciting also, and we had a meeting just before this morning, talking about all these win-win aspects of soil health. It's something that farmers are motivated to do strictly from the bottom line, maintaining productivity of their soils and improving their climate change resilience to extreme weather events, particularly drought and flooding and erosion, for the reasons I mentioned, better aggregate stability, et cetera. But also it's what we call a natural geo-engineering solution for carbon capture. So all that organic matter we store in the soil, that's carbon. It's usually 60% or so carbon. That's carbon that, where would that be otherwise? It'd be in the air as the greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. So that's why there's this interest in this linking of soil health and climate change. Finally, just a couple more slides. What I wanted to emphasize is that, you know, we are not in New York here, way in the back of the line about soil health. We have really been at the forefront. Farmers and researchers and our agencies like Ag and Markets, Environmental Conservation, also USDA, NRCS, working with us. We've been at this for more than 20 years. This is a old picture I pulled up from my slide. That's George Bowie. Some of you may know him. He was a plant pathologist. He's recently retired plant pathologist at Cornell. Really helped form our first soil health program work team along with myself and Harold Van Ness at Cornell. And but this really, we were responding to, you see those growers there, we were responding to their interest. I don't know if Donnie Brand's in that picture, but it might be there. One of our grower panel members, I think, was part of that first team. But what we want to focus on today, is, especially as we move towards the end of the day, is yes, we've done these great things. We're going to hear some of the cool things everybody's doing, working on. But where do we go from here? How do we really, why isn't everybody adopting these things? And we still are a long way from full adoption and maximizing and fully benefiting our soils. So we need to move forward, and we'll talk more about that during the day. So finally, just specifically about our project, New York Soil Health, here's kind of what our near-term objectives that we're working on. Identifying barriers to wider adoption. We're using soil surveys, so farmer surveys, et cetera, other ways of looking at that. Quantifying economic and environmental benefits. One thing a lot of farmers ask that are interested in this is, yes, I see and I hear about these benefits, but how long will it take for me to see those benefits? Is it going to be 2 years, 5 years, 20 years? And as we'll see in one of our presentations later this afternoon, it depends on which benefit you're talking about. So it does vary, and we're trying to get better information about that. Innovative cropping systems and soil ecology research. We'll hear about that from a number of our speakers today, and some of them have been funded through our project. Research on biochar and compost, another area of research we're funding. And this is very relevant to what's happening today, and very big part of New York soil health. Like I said, it's everybody. It's not a Cornell thing. And it's really promoting statewide communication, coordination, and collaboration. One of our major goals is almost accomplished. In the several hours it will be accomplished. Hold the first statewide soil health summit. And we hope it's the first of others to follow. And also something we'll hope to accomplish, I get some input from you later today. I'm gathering input from the full range of stakeholders for our New York soil health roadmap for the future. And many of you are involved in that already, and we'll get input from more of you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.